Hey everybody, Dave here. Today, I am going to automate RPAchallenge.com in Robocorp. So Robocorp is the second open source RPA tool that I have used, and I am finding myself really enjoying literally every tool that I'm trying out, but I also want to say that this one is awesome. It is very different from all of the RPA tools I've used up to this point. Robocorp uses pseudocode, and actually if you want to, you could just straight up use Python to develop in Robocorp, or at least to develop automations that would run on the robot framework, which is what Robocorp is based on. So just like always, before I start development, there's a couple things I want to show you so that if this is the first time you've seen a video of mine where I'm dealing with RPAchallenge.com, I don't want you to feel lost about what I'm going for. The first thing I want to show you is that if you go to RPAchallenge.com, if you click on the download Excel button, it's going to give you an Excel spreadsheet that has 7 fields and 10 rows of data. I'm going to open that and show you what that looks like. So we've got first name, last name, company name, role in company, address, email, and phone number. And there are 10 rows of data here. We're going to take these 10 rows of data and enter them into the RPA Challenge website. Let me show you a couple of things about this spreadsheet that I have manually changed though, because I think it's important if you were going to go and try this yourself. I've changed the last name field to no longer have a space at the end of it. I also right-clicked on the H column and I clicked delete. And then I selected all the rows that are below this data set. I mean, all the way down, like the next 1,000 rows. And I right-clicked on it and hit delete. The reason is that the column and the rows used to have data in them, I'm assuming. And so some RPA tools struggle with that. When you pull in the data, it'll pull in an extra column and extra rows. Yes, you can automate fixing that stuff. You can definitely filter out and stuff like that. But I just feel like fixing that in an automated fashion is outside the scope of what I'm trying to do here. Let me tell you now about what the point of all this is. So RPAchallenge.com was set up so that we can challenge ourselves as developers, or perhaps to challenge RPA tools in general, to see if you can automate a web page where the fields change location, the IDs and the names of the fields in the HTML actually changes with each page reload and things like that. So we're going to develop an automation where it goes in and clicks the start button. You can see it says round 1, and that's talking about basically the first row in Excel. So you want to enter that data and then click submit. Then you want to go and enter the second row and click submit. And you see each time I click submit, the field locations are changing on the page. So this is kind of what makes it difficult. If you're using, for example, just the absolute XPath to where these fields are, that's going to fail. If you're using the ID to identify these, that's going to fail. If you're using the name of these fields, that's going to fail. What you've got to do is use other methods to solidly identify where the fields are going to be so that each time the page reloads, you can still find them. And now that I've explained a couple of those things, let's go ahead and jump in and start developing in Robocorp. Let me click Create New Robot, and then I'm going to name this RPA Challenge. I'm going to click Create Robot. All right, so our robot environment has loaded up, and I'm going to go ahead and say, if you are new to Robocorp like I am, you might be a little bit confused where to start. That's where taking a little bit of training, looking at the documentation, looking at the tutorials can be a big help. What I want to say first, though, is that if you want to learn to automate RPAchallenge.com in Robocorp, there is actually a tutorial that tells you every step that Robocorp made. I didn't use that tutorial because I felt like it was cheating. So I went through and learned some of the pieces that I needed from other parts of documentation. And then I built out my first automation in Robocorp to automate RPAchallenge.com to make sure that I could do it. I then looked at the tutorial that they made to verify I was right. And there was actually only one thing that they did differently from how I would have done it. And so I actually changed what I'm going to do in this video based upon what they did there. And I'll tell you what that is when I get to it. But I just want to encourage you, it's a good idea to use their tutorials. I would not suggest doing it the way I did, which is a lot harder and not just looking at how is it done. But I would say I learned a lot because of it. We are going to make this as simple as possible. I'm not going to use extra functionality. I'm just going to make this thing work. I'm going to open tasks.robot. I want to point out a couple things first before I just go ahead and develop this. The way I'll be building this is all inside of this tasks area. So I'm going to delete a little bit because I'm not going to need this. I'm going to put all of the commands right in here. Normally what you're supposed to do is probably use multiple files in addition to using multiple cells where you actually put reusable code and I think they're called keywords. So it would look like something like this. And you're supposed to say like, make a reusable function. And then inside here, you would do commands like open browser or open workbook or whatever else. And then up here in your tasks, you can call on that. So let's say this is the first section. And then in this first section, I might call a reusable function. Okay, so I spelled it wrong. Reusable function. Let's fix that. Okay, reusable function. All right, so this right here calls this function, and then inside that function, these different commands are run. So it's a way to encapsulate your different functionality. That's what you're supposed to do, but I'm not doing that at all. I'm gonna delete this and instead type everything up here. So let's make a section in tasks called everything. This is, if you're familiar with .NET programming, then you would probably call this putting all of your code in the main method. So I know you know what I mean. You've done it before too. Don't judge me. Okay, so here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna get data out of Excel, and then we're gonna open the browser, and then we will put the data into the browser, looping through each of the rows from the data table. So let's try that. The first thing I wanna do is open the Excel workbook, open workbook. Now this is a command that I've looked up ahead of time, but these are pretty easy to guess actually. So I want to open the workbook, and the location is going to be at c:/test/challenge.xlsx. I'll show you that that's where it is. So right, c:/test, and then you'd put a backslash and then challenge.xlsx. Now, I don't know if this is a Python thing or what. Probably you Python developers are like, duh, Dave, but I don't know this, okay? I'm just an RPA developer who likes to pretend that I am good at .NET development, okay? So instead of having backslashes, you actually have to do a /. That's not that bad, right? But full disclosure, it took me like 15 minutes to solve that. Okay, so we need to open the workbook. Once I've opened the workbook, I want to get data out of the workbook. So I'm going to create a variable to put the data into. I need a list, which is, I'm going to, full disclosure again, took me like 20 minutes to figure this one out, is that I needed to use an @ symbol to reference the type list, and then use curly braces and whatever I want to name the variable. I'll use an = for the assignment operator. 4 spaces. I guess I haven't mentioned that. You have to put 4 spaces between commands and their arguments. Why is this underlined? Oh, undefined keyword, right. Before we keep going, I should probably add the library references. I've been developing an RPA too long. I forgot that there's actually library references in the namespace and imports that you should use. So I'm going to type library and then space 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to type a few namespaces, rpa.excel.files, which is where this comes from. So once I hit that, that little error should go away. I know that I'm also going to need to work with tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, rpa.tables, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And I want to do rpa.browser.selenium because we're going to use Selenium to automate Chrome. And that should be all we need. If you're watching this and you're like, Dave, how am I ever going to guess what I need? Well, you can just look at the documentation and tutorials, and those will tell you exactly what you need for different types of activities, different operations, so no big deal. All right, so we've got open workbook, and we're telling it where to open the workbook. We have our variable that's going to be of type list by the @ symbol, and our variable is called data. Now let's do a command to get data out of Excel. I believe that's read worksheet as table. And then we want to do spaces. And I want to say header = true. Because the first row in the spreadsheet is the header row, and I want it to know that when it reads it in. And the next thing I want to do is close workbook. And that's it. That's all we have to do to get data out of Excel. This will then be a table, and we can kind of operate with that similar to how I've done with other RPA tools. So next we can do is open the Chrome browser. So let's do open Chrome browser, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and we'll type http://rpachallenge.com. And then once that's open, you're going to love this one. I need to click the start button. Let me go back over and show you this. Let's reset. I'm going to hit F12 because we need to look at the developer tools. I'm going to hit inspect and then click on the start button. You can see that there's not a lot of stuff we can use to identify this button. Basically, the only thing that is useful is the fact that it has the word start in it. So in Robocorp, I'm going to say OpenBots on accident a few times. So just if I do, just pretend like I said Robocorp. So in Robocorp, if you want to click on a button that says a certain piece of text, you can literally just do this. Click button 1, 2, 3, 4, start. That's it. And that'll click the button, the start button. That's amazing. And this is, I wanted to point out, this is the thing that I found that the tutorial that Robocorp has for automating RPAchallenge.com, it showed me that I could do this. And I didn't know that was possible till I looked at the tutorial. The way that I did it was with the XPath. And that's fine too, but XPath expressions look a lot more complicated than just the word start does. So the next thing we'll do is we have to loop through the data that we got out of Excel. So I'm going to do a for loop. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I want to create a row variable here. So I'm going to use a $, open, close, curly braces. And inside that, we'll call this just row. For each row, 1, 2, 3, 4, in 1, 2, 3, 4, data, which is our table. We want an end to the loop. And then inside this loop, we are going to enter data into each of the fields. Now, I already know that we need to input text, so you could probably look it up if you didn't know. It's not all that hard. It took me like maybe only a couple of minutes to find out what's the command for this, or what's the keyword. And I thought, well, okay, what would be the keyword if I wanted to input text into a field? Okay, let's shoot. Well, let me just search for, oh, it's called literally input text. So I think that's pretty awesome. I mean, you might look up set text or whatever, but eventually you'd think of the word 1, 2, 3, 4, input text. Now I'm going to have to put in either an XPath expression or a CSS selector like this. And once I do that, then I can also put the data that I want to insert, but let's first deal with the XPath and or CSS expressions. So let's do it the XPath expression first. Let's go back to the web page, use the developer tools. On the first name field, let's look at it, and you can see that there's a tag of input, so I'm going to use that. And then the only attributes that are reliable here are going to be the only one is ng reflect name. There are multiple ways to do this, but I'm going to go with the simplest. So I just want to point out, you can't use the ID field, can't use the name attribute either, because those are not reliable, because they change each time the page reloads. And actually I can show you that. I'll just reload. And then let's select the same thing again. You can see now that the ID is different than it was before. Same thing with the name. The class right here that says untouched, pristine, whatever, that stuff is not unique to each field, so we can't use that either. What we can use is ng reflect name because it says label first name. Only thing I want to point out is that the role in company text field looks different. It doesn't say label role in company. It just says label role for that attribute, but it's also still an input tag. And then the other one is phone number. This one says label phone instead of label phone number. The rest of them, though, look just like their labels say. So it'd be label address, label email, etc. Okay, so let's go back over. Oh, let's do the last one is going to be the submit button. Let me click on this one and show you. This one is also of tag type input, and it doesn't have ng reflect name, but it has an attribute called value, and the value for that attribute is submit. So we're going to use that for our CSS selector or our XPath. Let's go back over to Robocorp. So for the input text, the first one I'm going to do though is first name, just to point out. And I think what I'm going to do is use the XPath for the first one. And then the rest of them, I'm going to use the CSS selectors because that's easier to read by just a little bit. The XPath expression I'm going to use will start with 2 forward slashes to say, hey, let's look anywhere in the document object model for this element that I want. And then I want to look for an input tag. And you're going to find a number of elements that have a tag of input. So of those, I want to find one that has an attribute called ng reflect name, and specifically the value that it should have is going to be label first name. So that's going to help us find the first name field. The next thing we want to do is put the kind of data in it that we want. So that's going to be getting data out of this row. So let's type $, and then row inside of curly braces. The next thing is going to be looking for the specific field that we want, which means using square brackets. And we'll type first name because that's the name of the field. And note that that's all you need. There's no quotation marks or anything. And then that's all we needed to put data into the first name field using the data from the first column, or I guess I should say the first name column, whether it's the first column or not, from the spreadsheet. And it's going to loop through row by row. And each time it should successfully find this first name field because we have used an identifier or a selector here that can handle when the page changes. Now, the thing is, I don't find XPath expressions to be all that readable. So instead of using this for the rest of them, let's use a CSS selector, which you'll see the syntax for is actually very similar in this case. So for the last name field, let's go for CSS selector. It's going to be a tag of input. So it's looking kind of similar, except it doesn't have the forward slashes. We're not going to need an @ symbol, but we're going to use ng reflect name equals label last name. And that's it. So, you can see it's kind of similar, but it is a little bit more readable than the XPath. And then, of course, we still want to do this row. And then this is going to be last name like that. At this point, I'm just going to copy the whole thing and paste it. Let's see, we need it 5 more times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm just going to change the values in each of these. So the second one I want to put in is, well, I guess the third one is going to be phone number. The fourth one will be email. Fifth will be, let's see, phone number, email, address, company name, and role in company. That's with a little I because that's the name of the header row in the Excel spreadsheet for that column. And then let's go back over and we're going to just change the CSS selectors for each of these to match. And of course, we looked in the developer tool, so I know what these values say. I'm not just guessing them. So it's going to be label phone. For email, it's just label email. Address, it's label address. For company name, it's label company name. And for role in company, it's just label role. The last thing we got to do is click on the submit button. So let's do click button, space 4 times. And instead of just typing, I wonder if I just type the word submit, if that would work. It's possible, but I don't think it's going to be the same as this start button because the text is actually part of an attribute called value. So let's use another CSS selector. Input, if you remember, let's see. Yeah, this is actually of type of tag input. And then we'll use the value attribute, which should equal submit. And then we don't need to put a value in that because we're just clicking on it. The next thing we would need to do is to close the browser. So let me show you that command, but I'm actually going to delete it afterward because I don't know how to set up a breakpoint. So close browser is the command. So it would open browser, do all this stuff, and at the end it would close the browser really fast. But I don't want the browser to close right away, and I don't know how to put a breakpoint in here. I did play around with using input dialogues as pop-ups to stop the flow temporarily until I choose for it to continue. And I would basically put it right here. You know, it would ask for some input from me, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I mean, it's kind of outside the scope of what we're trying to do. It worked pretty well though, so that is an option, but I just wanted to point it out. So I'm going to delete close browser for now because that's pretty simple. I'm not really worried about it. All right, so now we have typed that pretty fast. I mean, I did a lot of explaining. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh man, you can't let me leave this stuff all out of whack like that. Whoa. Okay, let's line everything up. Woo, that was a close one. You know, we can line up some of these too, I guess, for no reason. Okay, boy, that just looks a lot better, doesn't it? Let's go ahead and save that. All right, now let's go ahead and run this and see how well it does. Now, one thing, in case you run into this too, it does take some time sometimes to run this, but I think it's because I'm using the button that basically rebuilds everything. And I don't know if it's compiling or whatnot, but it is doing some environment setup of some kind. It's doing more than what our other RPA tools will typically be doing when you just click to run it. So keep that in mind. It might take a little bit of time, but once it's kind of built it, I don't think it has to happen like that every time. It's just kind of the first time. And when you deploy to production, obviously this kind of stuff doesn't have to happen because it's already built. Okay, so if you just watch and make sure, you know, check all the data that's doing, it's done. It's done already. Let's see if we can watch that again. Okay, so you saw it compiled it basically a lot faster the second time. So it just kind of has to go through some extra work the first time. This taking a little bit of time to load here has nothing to do with Robocorp. It's just the RPA Challenge website taking some time. Look how fast that is. Now, after I ran this for the first time, I thought, hold on, it's possible to run it that fast? Are you kidding me? So it occurs to me that I could go back to some of the other RPA tools and see if it's possible to increase the speed, right? Remove the weights that I put in there that I typically put in place, those implicit or arbitrary weights even, to make sure that it doesn't try to do something before the web page is ready. But clearly the web page can handle running it faster. So I'd be curious to go back and try those because this one ran in something like 4 or 5 seconds. So let me also show you the beautiful log that they have. I don't think it would be fair for me not to show this. So look how readable this log is. This is amazing. I mean, good grief. So I can go down and click into the data, for example, and you can see everything that it did. Now, when this runs in production, I assume that there's not this excessive logging happening, or you could probably set it to log this much or not this much. And probably if the data, it needs to be private, like some of these names, these are not real names, but if they were, then you could probably mask that data and stuff like that. But I didn't make any attempt to do that kind of thing. But look how nice this is. Wow, it's amazing. So what do you think of Robocorp? I am dumbfounded about how much fun, honestly, it is to develop using this, what I guess I'd call pseudocode, because this is, although I guess this is kind of a programming language on the robot framework, but it's not really syntactically difficult like programming languages can sometimes be. It's very different from the other RPA tools that I've used. It is very much closer to what programming is like. The fact that I declare these namespace imports at the top, and I also can use reusable functions in here in the same page and probably reference other files, functions that are over there. So I can use abstraction, encapsulation, and stuff. The fact that this tool runs automations, at least for web automations, super fast. It took me very little effort to type all this code out. Look at it. I mean, this is literally it. This is everything. I should point out that there is technically if you're used to Blue Prism, application modeler. If you use UiPath, then maybe UI Navigator. I think there's other terms for other RPA tools that I've forgotten. Anyway, But there is technically a place where you kind of hold on to UI elements. And in this case, it's called UI locators. And you can use that to, kick off a browser session, and then you can spy that, and you can use different, XPath and whatever else in here. And then in your script, you point to some of the things you created. But what I found in trying both ways is that in this simple of a script, it was kind of pointless to use the UI locators, because this, in my opinion, is still actually quite readable. So I don't feel like I care to store this in a different location to abstract it from me, because really it would be only a little bit less text anyways. Open source is the way to go. OpenBots and Robocorp are both excellent tools. They are very different, but I think it's really just up to each person which one you prefer. And honestly, why not just use them both for different developers? Now, granted, you might have the question of like, oh, well, we want a centralized orchestrator to automate, all of our automations, control everything under the same umbrella. That's a fair consideration to make. So maybe you don't want to use both tools in an enterprise environment at the same time. You might want to choose one or the other. All right, this is the second time now that I can say open source RPA tools for the win. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.